The envelope trembled in Rebecca Anderson's hands as she read the words that would change everything. Her brother Samuel was dying, and he wanted to see her one last time before the end came in California, nearly 2,000 miles away from St. Louis, Missouri, where she stood in the spring of 1875. Rebecca had $23 to her name, carefully saved from 2 years of working as a seamstress in Mrs. Halloway's shop, mending torn hems and letting out waistbands for the wealthy women who never looked her in the eye. The Stagecoach fare to San Jose, California, where Samuel had settled with his wife and 2 children, cost $45. She had begged Mrs. Halloway for an advance on her wages, but the woman had refused, citing the 3 girls she had already let go that month due to declining business. Rebecca had tried the bank, but a woman alone with no property and no husband had nothing to secure a loan against. She had even approached the Methodist Church, but Reverend Collins had looked at her with pity and empty hands, explaining that the congregation's charity fund had been depleted, helping families left destitute by the recent bank panic. Now she stood at the ticket window of the Butterfield Overland Mail Company office, her carpetbag at her feet containing everything she owned, knowing that the man behind the counter would shake his head and tell her what she already knew. The afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows, illuminating particles that danced in the air like her disappearing hopes. $45 for passage to San Jose, California, the clerk said without looking up from his ledger. Leaves tomorrow morning at 6 sharp. Won't wait for stragglers. I only have $23, Rebecca said, hating how small her voice sounded. My brother is dying. Is there any way, any work I could do along the route, or perhaps no charity cases? The clerk interrupted, finally glancing up at her with eyes that had seen too many desperate people making impossible requests. Company policy. You either have the fare or you do not. Rebecca felt her throat tighten. She would not cry here, not in front of this indifferent man who returned his attention to his ledger as though she had already ceased to exist. She picked up her carpetbag and turned toward the door, her mind racing through options she had already exhausted. She could try to find work that paid better, but that would take months, and Samuel's letter had made it clear that he had weeks at most. Consumption had taken their mother and father within a year of each other, and now it was claiming her only sibling, the boy she had helped raise after their parents died. "Excuse me, miss." The voice came from behind her, deep and quiet, with a slight drawl that marked its owner as someone from further south. Rebecca turned to find a man who looked to be in his late 20s, tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He wore dusty clothes that spoke of long days in the saddle, and his hat was pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair that needed cutting. There was something gentle in his face, despite the hardness that outdoor living had carved into it. "I could not help but overhear your situation," he said, and Rebecca noticed he was turning his own hat in his hands, a gesture that seemed almost nervous. "If you will pardon my boldness, I would like to pay the remainder of your fare." Rebecca stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I beg your pardon, your fare to California," he said. "I would like to pay the $22 you need. Consider it a loan if that sits better with you. You can pay me back when circumstances allow." "I cannot possibly accept such generosity from a stranger," Rebecca said, though even as she spoke, she felt hope fluttering in her chest like a caged bird testing its wings. "My name is Yates Thorne," he said, offering his hand with a slight smile. "Now we are not strangers." Rebecca took his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work and honest labor. "Rebecca Anderson." "But sir, Mr. Thorne, I cannot simply accept such a sum. I have no idea when I would be able to repay you, and I am heading to California myself," Yates interrupted gently. "San Jose, as it happens. I will be riding alongside the stagecoach the whole way on my horse. If it would ease your conscience, you could consider me a traveling companion rather than a benefactor. The roads can be dangerous, and there is some comfort in knowing friendly faces on the journey." Rebecca studied his face, looking for signs of ulterior motives or hidden expectations. She had learned to be cautious of men who offered help that seemed too good to be true. But Yates Thorne met her gaze steadily, and there was something in his eyes that spoke of genuine kindness rather than calculated manipulation. "Why would you do this for someone you do not know?" she asked. Yates was quiet for a moment, and something sad flickered across his face. "3 years ago, my younger sister needed help, and I was not there to provide it. I was off chasing what I thought was fortune in the Nevada silver mines, too caught up in my own ambitions to answer her letters promptly. By the time I returned home to Texas, she had already passed from fever, alone except for neighbors who barely knew her. I swore then that if I ever had the means to help someone reach family in need, I would do so. I have the means today, and you have the need." The rawness in his voice convinced Rebecca more than any practiced speech could have. This was a man carrying his own grief, trying to lighten it by easing someone else's burden. She thought of Samuel, of how little time remained, of how she would feel if she arrived too late because of pride. "I will pay you back," she said firmly. "Every penny with interest if you wish it. I give you my word." "Your word is enough," Yates said. "Come, let us settle your passage before the clerk closes his window for the day." 20 minutes later, Rebecca held a ticket to San Jose, California, and watched as Yates Thorne led his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding, toward the stable where the stage line kept its animals. He had insisted on buying her dinner as well, claiming he was hungry and preferred company while eating, but Rebecca suspected he had noticed how thin she was and guessed that she had been skipping meals to save money. They ate at a modest restaurant near the stage office and over plates of beef stew and fresh bread. Rebecca learned that Yates had been working as a ranch hand in Colorado for the past year, saving money to buy his own piece of land in California. He spoke of wanting to raise cattle and horses, of building something lasting rather than continuing to drift from job to job. There was a quiet determination in how he described his plans, and Rebecca found herself drawn to his steady presence, so different from the flashy cowboys who sometimes came into Mrs. Halloway's shop with their wives or sweethearts, all bluster and bravado. In turn, she told him about Samuel, about how he had gone west 6 years earlier seeking opportunities that St. Louis could not provide. He had found work as a schoolteacher in San Jose, had married a woman named Charlotte, and had written letters full of contentment and hope. The news of his illness had come suddenly, his handwriting shaky as he explained that the doctors had given him little time, and he wanted to see his sister once more, wanted his children to know their aunt before it was too late. "He sent me money for the fare," Rebecca said, her voice catching slightly. "But our boarding house caught fire last month. I lost everything, including the money he had sent. I wrote to tell him, but I do not know if the letter reached him or if he had the means to send more. His wife wrote that the medical bills have been devastating. You will reach him in time," Yates said with quiet conviction. "The stage makes good time when weather holds, and we are heading into the dry season. 2 weeks, perhaps 3 at most, and you will be with your brother." Rebecca wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that fate would be kind enough to grant her this one mercy. She finished her stew, surprised to find that her appetite had returned along with her hope, and when Yates walked her to the boarding house where she was spending her final night in St. Louis, She felt something shift inside her. This stranger, this cowboy with sad eyes and a kind heart, had given her more than money. He had given her a chance to say goodbye. The stagecoach departed precisely at 6 the following morning, with Rebecca seated inside alongside 3 other passengers. A middle-aged merchant named Mr. Humphreys, who spent the first hour complaining about the condition of the roads. A young couple named the Weavers, who were heading to Sacramento to join the husband's brother in a farming venture, and an older woman named Mrs. Chen, who spoke little English but smiled warmly at Rebecca when their eyes met. The coach was cramped and dusty, and within an hour, Rebecca understood why people complained about stage travel. The roads were rough, the suspension barely adequate, and every rut and stone seemed to transfer directly into her spine. But when she looked out the window, she could see Yates riding alongside on his buckskin horse, and somehow that made the discomfort more bearable. He had been true to his word about accompanying the stage, keeping pace with the coach throughout the morning. When they stopped at midday to change horses and allow passengers to stretch their legs, he was there to help her down from the high step, his hand steady and sure. "How are you managing?" he asked, and Rebecca appreciated that he did not pretend the journey was pleasant when it clearly was not. "I have been more comfortable," she admitted, pressing her hand against her lower back. "But I have also been more hopeless. I will take discomfort over despair any day." They ate a quick meal at the way station, a rough establishment that served beans and cornbread to travelers who had little choice and less time. The station keeper's wife was a friendly woman who fussed over Rebecca, clearly pleased to have another female to talk to after weeks of serving taciturn cowboys and irritable merchants. "You have a good man there," the woman said, nodding toward where Yates was checking his horse's shoes. Most cowboys would not slow themselves down for stage travel. Easier to ride hard and fast on their own schedule. "He is not my man," Rebecca said quickly, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "He is simply a fellow traveler who was kind enough to help me with my fare." The station keeper's wife gave her a knowing look. "If you say so, dear. But I have been running this station for 15 years, and I know the difference between a man doing a good deed and a man who has found a reason to change his plans. That cowboy altered his entire route for you." Rebecca wanted to protest, but the stage driver was already calling for passengers to board. She climbed back into the coach, her mind turning over the woman's words. She had assumed Yates was already heading to San Jose, that accompanying her required no sacrifice on his part. But now doubt crept in. Had he changed his plans for her? And if so, why? The afternoon passed in a haze of dust and heat. Mr. Humphreys fell asleep and snored prodigiously, while the Weavers whispered to each other in the corner, their heads close together in the way of newlyweds. Mrs. Chen produced a fan from her bag and used it steadily, the rhythmic motion somehow soothing. Rebecca watched the landscape change outside the window, the buildings of St. Louis giving way to rolling farmland, and then to wilder country, where settlements grew sparse and the horizon seemed to stretch forever. They spent that first night at a larger way station that had actual rooms for rent, though calling them rooms was generous. Rebecca shared a space barely larger than a closet with Mrs. Chen, sleeping on a narrow bed that sagged in the middle. But she had slept in worse places during the weeks after the boarding house fire, and exhaustion claimed her quickly. The next morning brought more of the same, jolting travel, brief stops, meals that consisted mainly of beans and salt pork. But it also brought more opportunities to talk with Yates during the rest periods. He had an easy way of conversing, asking questions that showed genuine interest rather than mere politeness. He wanted to know about her work as a seamstress, about what she enjoyed creating most, about her dreams beyond mere survival. "I used to design my own patterns," Rebecca told him as they walked slowly around the way station yard, stretching legs cramped from hours of travel. "Nothing fancy, but dresses that were a bit more modern than what Mrs. Halloway wanted to make. She preferred the styles from 10 years ago, said they were more respectable. But the younger women who came in would sometimes ask if we could do something different, something that did not make them look like their mothers." "Did you?" Yates asked, once or twice when Mrs. Halloway was not watching. "I would add a different sleeve or adjust a neckline, small changes that made the customer happy. But Mrs. Halloway found out and told me that if I wanted to be a designer, I should open my own shop." She meant it as a reprimand, but I remember thinking that perhaps someday I would do exactly that. "Why not in California?" Yates said. "San Jose is growing, always room for skilled tradespeople in a growing town." Rebecca had not allowed herself to think beyond reaching Samuel, beyond whatever time they would have together before the end came. But now the possibility opened before her like a door she had not known existed. She could stay in California. There was nothing calling her back to St. Louis except the familiar, and the familiar had never been particularly kind. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "though I suppose it depends on many factors. My sister-in-law may need help with the children after Samuel passes. I should be where I can be useful." "You should be where you can build a life," Yates said firmly. "Usefulness and self-sacrifice are admirable, but do not mistake them for a calling. Your brother would want you to thrive, not merely serve." The words struck Rebecca with unexpected force. She had spent so many years simply trying to survive, to make ends meet, to be good and grateful and unobtrusive. The idea that she deserved more than that felt almost revolutionary. The days began to blur together as they traveled westward. The landscape shifted gradually, becoming drier and more open. They crossed into Kansas, and the settlements grew even more sparse. The stage line followed established routes, stopping at way stations that ranged from well-maintained establishments to barely standing shacks where the station keeper looked as weathered as the buildings. On the fourth night, they stayed at a station run by a grizzled man named Hutchins who had been on the frontier for 30 years. Over a dinner of surprisingly good venison stew, he told stories of the early days when conflict with native tribes was common and lawlessness reigned. Rebecca listened, fascinated and sometimes frightened by tales of ambushes and narrow escapes. "Things have settled considerably," Hutchins said, noting her expression. "Most of the tribes have been pushed onto reservations, for better or worse. The real danger now is not arrows but desperation. Men who turned to outlawry when the war ended and never found their way back to honest living. They hit stages sometimes, looking for payrolls or wealthy travelers." "Has this route been troubled?" Yates asked, his voice casual but his attention sharp. "Not in 6 months," Hutchins said. "But that does not mean much. Outlaws are like wolves. They move where the hunting is good. You all keep your wits about you, especially once you cross into Colorado. Lots of empty country between here and Denver where a man could do ill and not face consequences." That night, Rebecca lay awake in her shared room, listening to the wind howl across the plains. She thought about outlaws and danger, about the vulnerability of being in a slow-moving stagecoach with no real means of defense. But she also thought about Yates riding alongside, his rifle always within reach, his attention always alert. She had noticed how he positioned himself between the coach and any approaching riders, how his hand moved to his gun whenever they passed through narrow defiles where ambush was possible. He was protecting her, protecting all of them, and he did it so naturally that she wondered if he even realized he was doing it. The following day brought their first real scare. They were crossing a particularly desolate stretch of Kansas when the driver suddenly urged the horses to greater speed. Rebecca looked out the window and saw 3 riders approaching from the north, moving fast. Yates had already spurred his horse ahead, positioning himself between the coach and the approaching men. Inside the coach, Mr. Humphreys had gone pale. "Outlaws," he whispered. "We are going to be robbed." "We do not know that," Mrs. Weaver said, though her voice trembled. Her husband put his arm around her, his jaw set in a way that made him look older than his years. The stage driver cracked his whip, and the horses surged forward, but the coach was heavy and could only go so fast. The riders gained steadily. Rebecca could see Yates clearly now, his rifle drawn, his body tense in the saddle. Her heart hammered in her chest, fear and something else, something fierce and surprising rising within her. If these men tried to hurt Yates, if they tried to take from her the one person who had shown her kindness in years, she would find a way to fight back, propriety be damned. But as the riders drew closer, Yates suddenly lowered his rifle. He called out something Rebecca could not hear, and one of the riders waved his hat in the air. The stage driver slowed the horses, and within minutes, it became clear that these were not outlaws but ranchers chasing stray cattle. They stopped to exchange words with Yates and the driver, apologizing for the scare and warning them that a storm was brewing to the west. When the coach finally rolled to a stop for the midday rest, Rebecca climbed down on shaking legs. Yates was there immediately, his hand on her elbow to steady her. "Are you all right?" he asked, his eyes searching her face. "I thought they were going to rob us," Rebecca said. "Or worse. I know. I am sorry you were frightened." His hand was still on her arm, warm and solid, and Rebecca found she did not want him to move it. "You were ready to defend us," she said. "You put yourself between the coach and potential danger without hesitation." "Of course," Yates said simply, as though there had been no other possible choice. "I would not see you harmed." The way he said it, the quiet certainty in his voice, made Rebecca's breath catch. This was not the hollow gallantry of men who spoke pretty words but delivered little. This was a man who meant what he said, who backed his words with action. She had known him for less than a week, and already she trusted him more than men she had known for years. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. For the fare, for riding with us, for being willing to face danger to keep us safe." "Rebecca," Yates said, and it was the first time he had used her given name. "I want you to know that I did not do this expecting anything in return, not gratitude, not repayment, not anything else. I did it because it was right, and because from the moment I saw you in that ticket office I wanted to help you." "Why?" Rebecca asked, though she was not sure she wanted to hear the answer, or perhaps she wanted it too much. "Because you looked the way I felt after my sister died," Yates said. "Lost and desperate and trying so hard to be brave. I could not help her, but I could help you. And if I am being honest, which I find I want to be with you, it is becoming about more than that. I enjoy your company. I admire your strength. I look forward to our conversations. I am glad my path has crossed with yours, regardless of how or why it happened." Rebecca felt heat rise in her face, but she did not look away. "I am glad too," she admitted. "You have been kinder to me than almost anyone I can remember. And I find myself thinking about you even when I should be thinking about other things, about what you will do in California, about whether our paths will continue together after we reach San Jose." "I hope they will," Yates said, "if you are willing." "I am," Rebecca said, and felt the truth of it settle in her chest like a warm stone. The storm the ranchers had warned about caught them that evening, forcing the stage to shelter at a way station earlier than planned. Rain lashed the building, and thunder rolled across the plains like artillery. The station was crowded with not only their party, but a group of freighters who had also sought shelter. Rebecca found herself pressed into a corner of the main room with Yates beside her, their shoulders touching in the cramped space. They talked for hours while the storm raged outside, their voices low beneath the conversation of others. Yates told her about growing up in Texas, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about the father who had taught him to read using the family Bible, and his mother who had sung songs in Spanish that she had learned from her own mother. He spoke of dreams deferred and mistakes made, of the restlessness that had driven him from place to place seeking something he could not quite name. Rebecca shared her own history, the loneliness of being orphaned young, the struggle to make her own way in a world that had little use for unmarried women without means. She told him about small joys, about the satisfaction of completing a difficult piece of sewing, about the books she borrowed from the lending library, about the hope that somewhere, somehow, life might offer more than mere survival. "It will," Yates said with conviction. "You are young and talented and braver than you know. The world has not been kind to you, but that can change, will change." "How can you be so certain?" Rebecca asked. "Because I am going to do everything in my power to make sure it does," Yates said. "If you will let me." Rebecca looked up at him, at the earnest intensity in his face, and felt something shift irreversibly inside her. This was not the slow-growing affection of longtime friends or the calculated match of convenience. This was something urgent and overwhelming, a recognition that felt like coming home to a place she had never been. "I will let you," she said. Yates smiled, and Rebecca thought she had never seen anything quite so wonderful. He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers, and they sat that way for the rest of the evening, connected in the crowded room, separate from everyone else in the way that people falling in love always are. The storm passed by morning, leaving the world washed clean and bright. They continued westward, climbing gradually into Colorado territory. The landscape grew more dramatic, with distant mountains rising like promises on the horizon. The air thinned and cooled, and Rebecca found herself needing the shawl she had packed at the bottom of her carpetbag. At a way station outside of Denver, they received news that made Rebecca's heart sink. A bridge had been washed out ahead, and the stage would need to take a longer route that would add 3 days to their journey. 3 days that Samuel might not have. She stood in the station yard, fighting tears, feeling time slip through her fingers like water. "We could ride ahead," Yates said quietly. "You and I. My horse can carry 2, and we could make better time without the stage. We would reach San Jose a week earlier at least." "I cannot ask you to do that," Rebecca said, though everything in her wanted to say yes. "The ticket is already purchased, and to abandon it would waste money I cannot afford to waste." "The ticket is already wasted if we do not take the faster route," Yates pointed out. "Rebecca, if we leave now, we can be in San Jose in 10 days, perhaps less if we push hard. We would need to camp rough, and it would not be comfortable, but you would reach your brother in time. That is what matters." Rebecca thought about propriety, about the scandal of traveling alone with a man she was not married to, about all the rules she had been taught to follow. And then she thought about Samuel, about his children who deserved to know their aunt, about the time that was bleeding away while she worried about reputation. "Yes," she said, "let us go." They left within the hour, after Yates purchased supplies from the way station, and Rebecca changed into the most practical dress she owned. She had never ridden horseback before, but Yates showed her how to sit behind him, how to hold onto him for balance, how to move with the horse rather than against it. And then they were riding west at a pace the stagecoach could never match, leaving the rutted roads behind for trails that cut more directly through the territory. It was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. The buckskin horse was strong and sure-footed, and Yates rode with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more time in the saddle than out of it. Rebecca held onto his waist, feeling the play of muscles beneath his shirt as he guided the horse, feeling the warmth of his body against her chest. It was improper and intimate and absolutely necessary, and she found she did not care about anything except the forward motion, the miles disappearing beneath them. They rode until dusk, until Yates declared they had covered as much ground as the horse could manage without risking injury. They made camp in a grove of cottonwoods near a stream, and Yates showed Rebecca how to build a proper fire, how to arrange stones to reflect heat, how to cook beans and bacon in a pan over open flames. They ate sitting on his bedroll, and after the meal, Yates spread out his second blanket for Rebecca. "You should sleep," he said. "We will be up before dawn to take advantage of the cool morning hours." "Where will you sleep?" Rebecca asked, looking at the single bedroll. "I will keep watch for a while, and then I will sleep by the fire. I have done it many times. Do not worry about me." But Rebecca did worry, and more than that, she was acutely aware of how alone they were, how far from civilization and its rules. In the firelight, Yates's face was all plains and shadows, beautiful in a rough, unpolished way. She thought about the weavers on the stage, the way they whispered to each other, the casual intimacy of long married couples. She wanted that. She wanted it with this man who had ridden into her life and changed everything. "Yates," she said softly, "what happens when we reach San Jose?" He looked at her across the fire, his eyes reflecting the flames. "What do you want to happen?" "I want to know that this is not just a journey to you," Rebecca said, finding courage she did not know she possessed. "I want to know that when we reach California, you will not simply ride away to your ranch and your new life, leaving me as a good deed completed and forgotten." "Forgotten," Yates said, his voice rough. "Rebecca, do you honestly think I could forget you? You are the reason I am taking this route. You are the reason I changed my plans, why I am pushing my horse harder than I should, why I am thinking about building a house with enough rooms for a family instead of a simple cabin for one man. I have known you for barely a week, and you have already changed every plan I made. I do not know what you call that, but I know I am not capable of forgetting you." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, hopeful tears. "I call it what it is," she said. "I call it love, or the beginning of it, and I feel it too so strongly that it frightens me." Yates stood and crossed to where she sat, kneeling beside her on the blanket. "It frightens me as well," he admitted. "I have never felt this way about anyone, but I am not going to run from it. I want to see where this leads if you are willing to take that journey with me." "I am," Rebecca said. And when Yates took her face in his hands and kissed her, gentle and sure, she felt the world narrow to this moment, this man, this fire-lit circle of safety in a vast wilderness. They held each other for a long time, talking in whispers, making promises that felt sacred in the darkness. When Rebecca finally lay down to sleep, Yates sat nearby, keeping watch as he had said he would, and she fell asleep feeling safer than she had in years. The next days established a pattern. They rose before dawn and rode until mid-morning, rested during the hottest part of the day, then rode again until dusk. They crossed into Utah territory, following trails that Yates knew from previous travels. The landscape grew stark and beautiful, red rocks rising against impossibly blue skies, canyons cutting deep into the earth. They saw few people, the occasional ranch or settlement, and once a group of Ute hunters who eyed them warily but let them pass without incident. Each night they camped, and each night they grew closer, learning each other in the way that people do when stripped of society's distractions. Rebecca learned that Yates sang while he worked, old songs his mother had taught him. She learned that he was patient when teaching her to care for the horse, to read weather in the sky, to move quietly through wilderness. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor that surprised laughs from her, even when she was exhausted and saddle-sore. Yates learned that Rebecca was stronger than she appeared, that she never complained even when clearly uncomfortable, that she had a quick mind that grasped concepts rapidly. He learned that she hummed while working, unconsciously creating melodies that matched her movements. He learned that she noticed small beauties, the pattern of stones in a stream, the shape of clouds, the color of sunset on canyon walls. He learned that she was brave in ways that had nothing to do with physical courage, and everything to do with the willingness to keep hoping when hope seemed foolish. On the 8th night, they camped in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, close enough to California now that Rebecca could feel anticipation building like a physical pressure. Tomorrow or the next day they would descend into the valleys, would reach settlements and roads, and eventually San Jose. They would reach Samuel, and she would discover whether they had traveled fast enough, whether fate had been kind enough to grant her this one mercy. "I am afraid," she admitted to Yates as they sat by the fire after their meal. "What if we are too late? What if he is already gone?" "Then you will grieve, and I will be with you while you do," Yates said. "But Rebecca, you have done everything possible. You left the moment you could. You traveled faster than anyone could reasonably expect. If the worst happens, it will not be because you failed him. It will simply be because time ran out." "I know that here," Rebecca said, tapping her head. "But here," she pressed her hand to her chest, "I feel like I should have moved faster, found a way sooner, sacrificed more." "You sacrificed everything," Yates said firmly. "Your comfort, your reputation, your safety. You left behind the only life you knew on faith that you would reach him in time. That is love, Rebecca. That is all anyone can ask." She nodded, wanting to believe him, and Yates pulled her close, letting her rest her head against his shoulder. They sat that way for a long time, watching the fire burn down to coals, and Rebecca felt gratitude for this man wash over her in waves. Whatever happened tomorrow, she was not facing it alone. They reached the outskirts of San Jose 2 days later, descending from the mountains into the Santa Clara Valley as the afternoon sun turned everything golden. The town was larger than Rebecca had expected, bustling with commerce and growth. Buildings lined streets that showed evidence of careful planning, and she could see orchards spreading across the valley, evidence of the agricultural prosperity that was drawing settlers west. Yates stopped at a mercantile to ask directions to the schoolteacher's residence, and the clerk directed them to a neat house on the eastern edge of town, modest but well-maintained. Rebecca felt her heart hammering as they approached. Yates had given her the horse to ride alone for these final moments, wanting her to arrive with some dignity rather than clinging to his back like a child, and she was grateful for his thoughtfulness. A woman answered her knock, thin and worn-looking, with dark circles under her eyes and gray streaking hair that was probably not yet 30 years old. But when she saw Rebecca, recognition and relief flooded her face. "Rebecca. Oh, thank God. Samuel has been asking for you every day." "Come in, please come in." The woman, Charlotte, pulled Rebecca into the house with trembling hands, talking rapidly. "He has been holding on. The doctor says it is sheer stubbornness keeping him alive. He wanted to see you so badly. He is in the bedroom. Go to him. I will wait here." Rebecca barely registered Yates staying behind with Charlotte as she moved through the small house to the back bedroom. The door was open, and she could see Samuel lying in bed, his body wasted by disease, his breathing labored. But his eyes were open, and when he saw her, something like a smile crossed his ravaged face. "Becky," he whispered, using the childhood name only he had ever called her. "You came." "Of course I came," Rebecca said, moving to his bedside and taking his hand, shocked by how fragile it felt, all bone and papery skin. "Did you think I would not?" "I thought you might not get my letter in time," Samuel said. "Or that you would not have the means. I am so glad I was wrong." They talked for hours, or rather Samuel talked as much as his strength allowed, and Rebecca listened, committing every word to memory. He spoke about his children, Daniel, who was 5 and showed promise as a student, and Margaret, who was 3 and had her mother's gentle nature. He spoke about his life in California, about the satisfaction of teaching, about the community he had found in San Jose. He spoke about their parents, about memories from childhood, about the love that had sustained them through hardship. "I need you to promise me something," Samuel said as shadows lengthened in the room. "Promise you will watch over Charlotte and the children, not take them over. Charlotte is a capable woman, but be there for them. They will need family, and you are all they have." "I promise," Rebecca said through tears. "I will stay in San Jose. I will be here for them." "Good," Samuel said and seemed to relax slightly. "That is good. Now tell me about you. How did you get here? The money I sent." Rebecca told him everything, about the fire and the loss, about standing in the ticket office without enough fare, about the cowboy who had paid her way and ridden beside the stage, and then carried her on his own horse across half the country to get her here in time. As she spoke, she saw understanding dawn in Samuel's eyes. "This cowboy," he said, "do you love him?" Rebecca had not let herself think the word so directly, but hearing Samuel say it, she knew the truth. "Yes, I think I do." "Good," Samuel said again. "You deserve love, Becky. You deserve someone who sees your worth and treasures it. Do not let fear or propriety keep you from happiness. Promise me that too." "I promise," Rebecca whispered. Samuel smiled and closed his eyes, and for a moment Rebecca panicked, thinking he had gone. But his chest continued to rise and fall, and she realized he had simply exhausted himself. She sat with him as he slept, holding his hand, memorizing his face, giving him the vigil he deserved. Charlotte brought her dinner, and Yates appeared briefly in the doorway to check on her, but Rebecca barely left Samuel's side for the next 3 days. She was there when he woke, there during his brief periods of lucidity, there as he slowly faded. She met his children, sweet-faced Daniel, who did not understand why his father would not get better, and little Margaret, who knew something was wrong but could not articulate it. She held Charlotte when the woman broke down, overwhelmed by impending loss and exhaustion. And Yates was always nearby, never intrusive but always available. He repaired loose boards on the house. He chopped firewood. He played quiet games with Daniel and Margaret, giving Charlotte respite. He brought food from town and made sure everyone ate. He was a steady, quiet presence, and Rebecca found herself loving him more with each passing hour. Samuel died on the 4th night after Rebecca's arrival, slipping away peacefully in his sleep with his family around him. The funeral was 2 days later, attended by what seemed like half the town, evidence of how much Samuel had been loved and respected. Rebecca stood between Charlotte and Yates during the service, drawing strength from both, and when they lowered Samuel's coffin into the ground, she felt a chapter of her life close, even as another was opening. In the weeks that followed, Rebecca settled into life in San Jose. She stayed with Charlotte initially, helping with the children and the household while Charlotte dealt with Samuel's affairs and her own grief. But as Charlotte began to recover some equilibrium, it became clear that what both women needed was space to breathe, to establish new patterns without the constant reminder of loss. Rebecca rented a small room above a bakery in town and opened a seamstress shop in the corner of a dry goods store. The proprietor, a kindly man named Mr. Ferguson, was happy to have someone capable of doing alterations and custom work for his fabric customers. Within a month, Rebecca had more business than she could easily handle. Women came seeking modern styles, practical work clothes, fancy dresses for special occasions. Word spread that Miss Anderson could create anything you could imagine, and her appointment book filled rapidly. Yates bought land 20 miles outside San Jose, a beautiful piece of property in the foothills with good grazing and a year-round creek. He began building a house, and Rebecca visited on Sundays, watching the structure rise from foundation to framed walls to something that looked like a home. He had installed glass windows, a luxury on the frontier, and built a wide porch that caught the evening breeze. There was room for a family, he told her, if that family ever materialized. They courted properly, or as properly as possible given that everyone in town knew they had traveled together from Missouri. Yates called on Rebecca at her shop and escorted her to church socials and town gatherings. They took walks in the evening, talking about everything and nothing, learning each other in this new context of settled life rather than desperate flight. 6 months after they arrived in San Jose, Yates proposed formally with a ring he had commissioned from a jeweler in town, a simple gold band with a small sapphire that matched Rebecca's eyes. They married in the same church where they had buried Samuel, with Charlotte and the children in attendance and half the town as witnesses. Rebecca wore a dress she had made herself, ivory silk with lace at the collar and cuffs, the most beautiful thing she had ever created. Their wedding night was gentle and sweet, two people who had already shared so much finally coming together completely. Yates carried her over the threshold of the house he had built for them, and Rebecca looked around at rooms that were waiting to be filled with life and love, and felt happier than she had ever imagined possible. The first years of marriage brought challenges and joys in equal measure. The ranch prospered as Yates proved to be as skilled at raising cattle and horses as he had claimed. Rebecca's seamstress business grew until she needed to hire help, training 2 young women in cutting and stitching while she focused on designs and client consultations. They built a separate shop in town, a real storefront with Rebecca's name painted on the window, and she felt pride every time she walked through that door. Charlotte remarried 2 years after Samuel's death, a widower named Thomas Grant who owned a hardware store and treated Daniel and Margaret like his own children. Rebecca was glad for her sister-in-law, glad that she had found happiness again. The families remained close, gathering for Sunday dinners and holidays, creating new traditions while honoring old memories. Rebecca and Yates suffered through a miscarriage in their 2nd year of marriage, a loss that devastated them both. But they held each other through the grief, and when Rebecca conceived again the following year, they were cautiously hopeful. Their first child was born in the spring of 1879, a healthy boy they named Samuel Thomas Thorne, after Rebecca's brother and Yates's father. He had his mother's dark hair and his father's creek water eyes, and they both fell completely, irrevocably in love the moment he drew breath. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, Rose Charlotte, named for both her grandmothers. She was tiny and fierce from the start, making her opinions known with lusty cries that echoed through the house. Yates proved to be a devoted father, endlessly patient with the children, teaching them to ride and read with equal enthusiasm. Rebecca watched him with their babies and fell in love with him all over again, seeing the tenderness beneath his rough exterior. The ranch continued to prosper. Yates bought more land, hired ranch hands to help with the growing herds, and established a reputation for breeding quality horses. Rebecca's shop became one of the most successful businesses in San Jose, and she trained a succession of young women in the trade, giving them skills and independence, just as she had found for herself. Together, she and Yates built a life that was rich not just in material success, but in love and purpose. They added to their family again when Rose was 3 twin boys that arrived unexpectedly and threw the household into delightful chaos. James and Jonathan were identical in appearance but wildly different in temperament. James quiet and thoughtful, Jonathan bold and mischievous. The house rang with laughter and noise, and Rebecca often found herself pausing in the middle of cooking or sewing to simply marvel at what her life had become. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Yates took Rebecca back to the spot where they had camped in the Sierra Nevada foothills during their desperate ride to San Jose. They left the children with Charlotte for a weekend and rode out together, retracing part of that original journey. They made camp in the same grove of trees, and after dinner, they sat by the fire just as they had a decade earlier. "You ever think about how different life would be if I had not been in that ticket office that day?" Rebecca asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "All the time," Yates admitted. "If I had arrived 10 minutes later or stopped to eat lunch before going to buy my ticket, we might never have met. You might have found another way west, married someone else, built a different life." "I do not think I would have," Rebecca said. "Found another way, I mean. I think I would have been stuck in St. Louis, working at Mrs. Halloway's shop until I was old and gray, scraping by and never really living. You gave me more than Stagecoach fare that day. You gave me a future." "You gave me one too," Yates said. "I was drifting before I met you, moving from place to place with no real roots or purpose. You changed that. You gave me a reason to build instead of just survive." "We saved each other," Rebecca said softly. "Yes," Yates agreed. "We did." They made love under the stars that night, surrounded by wilderness and memory, and Rebecca felt the same overwhelming love she had felt the first time, deepened now by years and children and shared struggles. This man, this cowboy who had seen her at her most desperate and chosen to help, had become her whole heart. The years continued to pass, bringing more changes and challenges. A drought in 1885 tested the ranch, but they survived it through careful management and stubborn determination. A fire destroyed Rebecca's shop in 1887, but they rebuilt it bigger and better, with improved equipment and more space. The children grew, Samuel developing a love for animals that suggested he would follow his father's path, Rose showing artistic talent that Rebecca nurtured carefully, the twins growing into strong, capable young men. In 1890, Rebecca received a letter from St. Louis informing her that Mrs. Halloway had passed away, leaving her former employee a small bequest in her will. It was not much, barely $100, but the gesture touched Rebecca. She used the money to establish a fund for young women learning trades, wanting to help others find the independence she had found. They celebrated Samuel's graduation from school, then Rose's, watching their oldest children become adults with all the joy and terror that entailed. Samuel stayed on the ranch, working alongside his father and eventually taking over more of the daily operations as Yates's joints began to stiffen with age. Rose moved to San Francisco to study art, a decision that frightened Rebecca even as she supported it, understanding her daughter's need to pursue her dreams. The new century arrived, bringing changes to San Jose and the wider world. The town was becoming a city, with electric lights and telephones and automobiles replacing horses on some streets. Rebecca and Yates, watched these transformations with fascination and occasional bewilderment, marveling at how different the world was becoming from the one they had known in their youth. On a spring afternoon in 1905, Rebecca sat on the porch of the ranch house, now weathered and comfortable with age, watching her grandchildren play in the yard. Samuel had married a local girl named Marie, and they had 3 children who visited often. Rose had returned from San Francisco with a husband and a baby daughter, settling back in San Jose where she taught art to eager students. The twins had both found wives and work, James as a schoolteacher like his uncle Samuel, Jonathan as a partner in a freight business. Yates came to sit beside her, moving more slowly now but still strong, still the man she had fallen in love with 3 decades earlier. His hair was gray, his face deeply lined, but his eyes were the same creek water color, still looking at her with love and desire and deep contentment. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, taking her hand. "Everything," Rebecca said. "How I stood in that ticket office in St. Louis with $23 and no hope, and how different my life is now. How a single act of kindness from a stranger changed everything." "I was not kind," Yates said. "I was selfish. I saw a beautiful woman in distress, and I wanted any excuse to be near her, to talk to her, to have her look at me the way you did when I offered to pay your fare." "You were kind," Rebecca insisted. "You gave me a chance when no one else would. You rode beside that stage and then carried me across half the country. You built this life with me, this beautiful, impossible life. How can you say that was selfish?" "Because I got more than I gave," Yates said simply. "You think I saved you, but Rebecca, you saved me. You gave me purpose and love and a family. You gave me everything that matters. If I had not helped you that day, I would have continued drifting, alone and lonely, probably dying in some bunkhouse with nothing to show for my years. Instead, I got this. I got you and our children and a life worth living. So yes, I was selfish, and I would do it again 1,000 times." Rebecca laughed and kissed him, not caring that their grandchildren might see, not caring about anything except this moment and this man. "Then we saved each other," she said. "And I would not change a single moment, not the hard parts or the scary parts or any of it, because it all led here." "To here," Yates agreed, gesturing to the ranch, the family, the life they had built. "To home." They sat together as the sun set, painting the California sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, surrounded by the evidence of their love and labor. Rebecca thought about the girl she had been, desperate and afraid, standing in a ticket office with not enough money to reach her dying brother. She thought about the cowboy who had paid her fare without expecting anything in return, who had ridden beside her and then carried her to safety. She thought about all the choices and chances and small miracles that had led to this moment. And she was grateful, bone-deep grateful, for every step of the journey, for the hardship that had taught her strength, for the loss that had taught her to treasure what she had, for the desperate ride across a continent that had led her to love. The Stagecoach fare had been $45, but what she had gained from that journey was beyond price. She had found not just her brother before the end came, but herself, her purpose, her future, and the love of her life. As darkness fell and the grandchildren were called inside for dinner, Rebecca and Yates remained on the porch a moment longer, hands clasped, hearts full. They had traveled far from that spring day in St. Louis, but the connection forged in that ticket office had never wavered. They had promised to walk the path together, and they had kept that promise through 3 decades of joy and sorrow, triumph and trial. "Come inside," Rebecca finally said, squeezing Yates's hand. "The family is waiting." "Let them wait a moment longer," Yates said, pulling her close and kissing her forehead. "I want to sit here with my wife and remember how lucky I am." Rebecca smiled and nestled against his shoulder, feeling his heartbeat steady beneath her cheek, and knew that luck had nothing to do with it. They had both made choices, taken risks, opened themselves to possibility even when it seemed foolish or dangerous. They had both been brave enough to love when love seemed impossible. And that courage, that willingness to hope and trust and try, had made all the difference. The stars began to emerge overhead, the same stars that had watched over them during their desperate flight across the frontier, the same stars that had witnessed their promises and their passion. And beneath those stars, on a porch in California, Rebecca and Yates held each other and knew that they had found something rare and precious. A love built on kindness, tested by hardship, and proven enduring by time. When they finally went inside to join their family, the house was warm with light and laughter, filled with the children and grandchildren who were the living proof of their love story. Rebecca looked around the table at the faces she cherished, each one a blessing she had never expected to receive, and felt her heart overflow with gratitude. This was what that $45 fare had purchased. Not just passage to California, but passage to a life beyond her wildest dreams. And the cowboy who had paid it had received his reward tenfold, in love and family and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. They ate together, told stories, laughed at the twins' jokes and Samuel's observations about the cattle, admired Rose's sketches of her daughter. And later, when everyone had gone home or to bed, Rebecca and Yates sat together in their room, the same room where all their children had been conceived and born, the same room where they had comforted each other through losses and celebrated victories. "I love you," Rebecca said, the words as natural as breathing after 30 years but still important to say. "Thank you for paying my fare all those years ago. Thank you for riding beside me. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for letting me," Yates said, holding her close. "Thank you for saying yes when I asked if you would let me try to make your world better. Thank you for taking a chance on a dusty cowboy who had nothing to offer but good intentions and a strong horse." "You had everything to offer," Rebecca corrected gently. "You just did not know it yet." They held each other as night deepened around them, two people who had started as strangers in a ticket office and become each other's whole world. The journey from St. Louis to San Jose had been long and hard, but the journey they had taken together since then, building a life and a family and a love that sustained them through every challenge, had been the greatest adventure of all. And as Rebecca drifted toward sleep in her husband's arms, she knew that the story beginning with a cowboy paying a stagecoach fare had ended exactly as it should, with love triumphant, promises kept, and two souls who had found in each other everything they had been seeking, even when they had not known what they were looking for. The stagecoach had carried her west to say goodbye to her brother, but the cowboy who rode alongside had carried her home to herself, and that made all the difference in the world.